Hey everybody, here we are. We're at the halfway point of this study of Ecclesiastes, the journey for meaning. And so now we have completed 6 chapters and we have 6 to go. So today we're in chapter 7, and the title of chapter 7 is Seeking the Better Things in Life. That's a good thought. Everybody's doing that. But before we get too deep into that, I want to review chapter 6. And chapter 6, as you recall, was how to be satisfied. Now, what do you remember about our last study? Well, I've got 3 points that I specifically remember. The first is this, that unsatisfaction is a common evil among people everywhere. People all over the globe are unsatisfied today. It's easier to be unsatisfied for most than it is to be happy. The next thing I recall is that things will never satisfy. Our labor feeds us, but it does not satisfy us. And then the last thing that I want to recall is that only goodness satisfies the soul and is only found by trusting and living for God. You remember those things? That was a good study. But tonight it gets even better. Chapter 7, Seeking the Better Things in Life. That's what we're looking at. There's an old phrase, and maybe you heard it. The best things in life are free. You ever heard that? So talking about the best things are free, we're going to look at several things that are the best things, and they're free things that all you have to do is seek out. Are you with me? Okay, so we're going to look at the first 7 verses, and in the first 7 verses, Solomon's telling us that we need to seek a humble heart. Now, as I read these verses, I want you to pay particular attention to the word better and the word heart, and see how the better things impact the heart, and we'll talk about that. So grab your Bible, your device, however you get to God's Word, and follow along with me. I'm going to start reading in verse 1. Here's what it says. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This is also vanity. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. So did you hear all those uses of the word better and the word heart? Let me ask you this question. What are some better things mentioned here, and how do they impact your heart? Well, let's look at a few. The first thing we saw is that a good name is better than precious ointment. Now think about that. Back in biblical times, precious ointment was a very expensive commodity. You may recall that the woman brought in the alabaster container, and she broke it, and she poured all of that fragrant oil on Jesus. And if you recall, his disciples got upset about that. They said, why would she waste all of that expensive oil when it could have been sold and poor people could have been taken care of? So back in that day, precious ointment was very expensive. And here we're told that our name, how we live and how people see us, is better than precious ointment. We also see that a funeral is better than a party. Did you notice that? It said it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a party. Why? It said because the living will take a funeral to heart. Now think about this for a minute. If you've ever been to a funeral and you've ever been to a party, compare the two. When you're at a party, you're just having a good time, hanging out. Maybe it's game night, whatever it is, and you're just enjoying yourself. You're not thinking much about it. You're just having fun and hanging out with friends. But when you go to a funeral, it's very different. All of a sudden, you come face to face with how brief life really is. And you are sitting there in that funeral realizing that a loved one or a friend has passed away and they've gone on, and that one day we're going to be there as well. And that will do a work in your heart. It will do a work that going to a party won't do. It also said that sadness and sorrow makes the heart better. Here's one more. Rebuke is better for the heart, it said, than a fool's song. You know, when people are talking about how great you are, really, that's a fool's song. But when a close friend will come to you and rebuke you and tell you, hey, this is something that's not right. This is something you need to work on. Well, if you take that to heart and you work on it, your heart is going to be better. So think about this. All of the things that are heartbreakers are better for the heart. And then we go on to verses 8 through 14, where we learn that we need to seek a patient spirit. Let's read that together, starting in verse 8. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider, surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. Seeking a patient spirit. Here's a question for you. What are some ways that we can develop a patient spirit? Particularly, what did it say in these verses? Well, it said in verse 8 that we need to realize that we're not there yet, but it will be better when we get there. So sometimes we're trying to achieve a certain thing, we're trying to get to a certain place, and we're just impatient about it. But we don't need to be impatient. We are going to get there. Time marches on. We're going to get to that place, and when we get there, it's going to be better. So we just need to be patient in the journey. In verse 8, it also says that we do not need to be proud. In verse 9, it says that we do not need to be angry. All these are signs of an impatient spirit. In verse 10, it says, do not compare everything to the good old days. It's like, when things are happening and they're not going your way, you're thinking about, well, back 2 years ago, life was so much better. Well, no, it was probably just as hard, but you remember the good times easier. But don't be comparing where you're at now to the good old days and saying, I wish I was back then. That, again, it's an impatient spirit. In verses 11 through 12, we're told that we should seek wisdom and knowledge, and that's going to help us to have a patient spirit. And then in verse 13 and 14, we're told that we need to realize that God is in control. What he makes crooked, we can't make straight. We need to accept that he's in control of our life and be patient with whatever journey he has you on. Seeking a patient spirit. Going back to verse 8, it said this. It said that the end was better than the beginning. So I want to ask you this. Why is the end better than the beginning? Well, it's because patience is no longer needed. And so, but until you reach the end, you have to seek a patient spirit. Now, the next thing in verses 15 through 18, we see that we need to seek a balanced life. Let's read that. I have seen everything in my day of vanity. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. Do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp this, and also not remove your hand from the other, for he who fears God will escape them all. Let me ask you this: what extremes are mentioned here, and why are they not good? Well, it's kind of odd, but it says don't be too righteous. So why is that not good to be too righteous? Well, I want to tell you, I believe it's because you might become self-righteous. And then it says, don't be too wise. If you're too wise, you may be too wise for your own good. I mean, like Solomon, you saw in the first couple of chapters how he just pursued so many things and he gained so much knowledge and wisdom. And he said that he was miserable because of it. So don't be too righteous, don't be too wise. And then it said, don't be too wicked. We can't help it that we're sinners. We're all sinners, but we shouldn't bask in the sin. In other words, hey, you're a sinner, but don't glory in it. Don't bask in it. Don't live in it. Don't be too wicked. And then it says, just don't be foolish at all. Next, in verses 19 through 22, we see that we need to seek a right perspective. Let's read that. Wisdom strengthens the wise, more than 10 rulers of a city. For there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Also, do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others. So we're talking about seeking the right perspective. What is the right perspective that Solomon wants us to grasp? Well, I believe what he's teaching us here is that the right perspective promotes humility. The right perspective is that we're not any better than anybody else. We're sinners in the midst of sinners. I mean, think, for example, what it told us there in verses 21 and 22. It says, don't take to heart when someone is talking about you because you're just as guilty. At some point, you were talking about somebody. You wouldn't want them to know that you were talking about them. And you know what? If somebody's talking about you, hey, you're no better than they are. That's the right perspective. We're all sinners. We're sinners in the midst of sinners. What are some other ways we take offense of the same things we do ourselves? Think about that. I'll tell you several I thought of. I thought of bad driving. I mean, we are so quick to point out a bad driver, but you know as well as I do, on some days we're all bad drivers. On some days we run the yellow lights. On some days we're probably in somebody's way that's in a hurry. I mean, we all make mistakes. I thought about having a wrong attitude. You know, you ever had somebody dump their bad attitude on you? And yet you're going to tell me you've never dumped your bad attitude on somebody? Or impatience. You know, somebody's impatient with you. They're wanting you to hurry up and it frustrates you, but don't tell me you've never been impatient yourself. So the right perspective is realizing that I'm no better than anybody else. We're sinners in the midst of sinners, and that should humble us. Next, we're told that we need to seek the source of wisdom. All this I've proved by wisdom. I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to search, and seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Seeking the source of wisdom. What was Solomon seeking for? And what did he find? Well, he said he was seeking to understand things. He was seeking knowledge and wisdom to understand the deep things, and yet he found that he couldn't understand them. Remember in chapter 2, what were some ways Solomon sought meaning in life? He sought pleasures, remember that? He sought great works and great wealth and fame. But all these are the ways of the world. Talking about that lady, and let me read that again. He says, I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. That woman he's talking about is the mistress of the world. It's the world and her calling you to do things her way, to seek wisdom her way. The source of wisdom is not found in the mistress of the world. We're told there that true wisdom is only found in God. It says, he who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. So let's look at Solomon's conclusions in verses 27 through 29. Here's what I've found, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Truly, this only have I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So what do you think Solomon's conclusions are here? Well, some of it's kind of obscure, but there are some things that are plain. In verse 29, for example, what's Solomon's final conclusion saying? Well, I tell you what I think it's saying. I think it's saying that we all sin and fall short of God's glory. For our schemes, we deserve the punishment of hell. But you know what? I love 1 Corinthians 15:57. It says, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through Jesus Christ. I wonder if that's the one man Solomon found. There was only one righteous on earth, and that was Jesus. And he died for you, and he died for me. Now, going back to the beginning, remember that phrase, the best things in life are free. Well, they may be free, but they're hard earned. We're to be seeking a humble heart, a patient spirit, a balanced life, a right perspective, and the source of wisdom. It's been good to be with you again this week. I hope this has been a blessing to you. And until we get back together next week, I just encourage you to seek the better things in life.